She's unstable, my mother announced to the entire courtroom, loud enough that I heard it from the hallway. She's always been unstable. Ask anyone who knows her. The judge looked up from his papers. He looked at my mother's lawyer. Then he looked at me, standing quietly beside my own counsel, hands folded in front of me. "Counselor," he said slowly, "do you honestly not know who your client is dealing with here?" My mother's lawyer said nothing. My mother's face went the color of old snow. I said nothing either. I'd been saying nothing for 3 years. I was very good at it by then. "My name is Elise. I'm 31 years old. I work as a forensic auditor at a mid-size firm in Ottawa, which means I spend my days finding the money people think they've hidden. I'm good at it. I have a 6-year-old son named Callum, and he is the single best thing that has ever happened to me, and I would light the entire world on fire before I let anyone use him to hurt me again." That's not a metaphor. That's just a fact I arrived at slowly, the way you arrive at most important facts, through a lot of pain, a lot of silence, and one birthday party that broke something in me that I didn't know could break. I need to go back a bit. When I was 25, I married a man I'll call my ex-husband. He was charming and funny and from a family that my parents thought was a significant upgrade from our own. His parents owned 2 commercial properties in Kanata and a vacation property near Tremblant. My mother talked about them the way she talked about the royal family, with a reverence that embarrassed everyone except her. My parents liked him. My younger sister, who I'll call my sister, loved him, or at least loved what he represented, which was proximity to people with nicer things. She had always been the one who understood the social arithmetic of our family better than I did. I was the one who did well in school and became a professional. She was the one who learned how to be in a room correctly. My ex-husband and I had Callum when I was 24, a year before we actually got married. The timing wasn't ideal, but I loved my son from the second I knew he existed, and I assumed, naively, that everyone around us would feel the same. They did not. My mother-in-law made a comment at my baby shower, something about how she'd always imagined her grandchildren having a proper start. My own mother laughed like it was a joke. I smiled and ate my lemon squares and said nothing. I got very good at that particular smile. I wore it for years. The marriage started falling apart about 18 months in, which was right around the time my ex-husband started confiding in my sister more than he confided in me. I don't need to spell out what that became. You already know where it went. I knew too, I just needed a few months to let myself believe what I was seeing. When I asked him to leave, my mother called me the same evening. "You need to think about what you're doing," she said. "You have a child, you have a family. This kind of selfishness has consequences." I remember standing in my kitchen in my socks, holding the phone, listening to my mother tell me that leaving my unfaithful husband was selfish. Callum was asleep down the hall. The dishwasher was running. Outside, someone's car alarm was going off on our street. "Okay," I said. "Thanks, Mom." That was the last time I cried about any of it for almost 2 years. Here's what nobody tells you about being a single mother in your late 20s, with a professional designation and a firm sense of your own finances. People assume you're fine. They don't call to check in. They don't bring meals. They don't offer to take your kid for the weekend so you can sleep. They assume that because you're competent, you don't need anything. Competence, it turns out, exempts you from compassion in a way that struggling doesn't. I worked. I paid my bills. I paid my rent. We'd sold the house in the divorce, and I'd taken my half and put it in a TFSA and a FSA, which I was saving to buy somewhere smaller, somewhere that was actually mine. I brought Callum to daycare. I picked him up. I made dinner. I gave baths. I read Elephant and Piggy books until I could recite them backwards. On Saturdays, when it was just the 2 of us, we'd go to the Ratto Center and get Vietnamese food from the food court, and Callum would get a bubble tea he would drink 3 sips of and then completely forget about. My parents saw us maybe once a month, sometimes less. My sister and my ex-husband had made their relationship official about 8 months after I asked him to leave. My mother announced this to me over the phone like she was reading a weather report, just information, no affect, nothing to see here. My father said nothing, which was what my father usually did when something required him to take a side. I said nothing. I'm sure you're beginning to see the pattern. My ex-husband moved into my sister's apartment in Sentrytown. His parents, my former in-laws, continued to orbit my family like nothing had changed. My mother had Sunday dinners with all of them. I was not invited. Neither was Callum, except on the occasions when someone wanted him there for a photo or an occasion, and then he was retrieved and returned like a library book. I noticed this. I filed it away. I kept working. What I hadn't told anyone, not my mother, not my friends, not anyone who might accidentally mention it in the wrong company, was that my firm had been acquired 18 months earlier by one of the largest financial compliance groups in the country, and I had been offered and accepted a senior position that came with an equity stake. I was not rich, but I was building towards something real, and I was doing it very quietly, the way I do most things. I drove the same Honda Civic I'd had since grad school. I didn't talk about work at family events. I let my mother assume I was doing fine in the vague, unremarkable way she'd always assumed about me. It suited me. Callum turned 5 in March. There's a particular quality to March birthdays in Ottawa that I've always thought was either poetic or cruel depending on your mood. It's still cold, still gray, but there's something in the air that keeps promising it's almost over. Spring is coming, just not yet. I plan his party the way I planned everything, carefully, thoroughly, with a spreadsheet. I booked the community center room in our neighborhood. I ordered a cake from a bakery on Bank Street that Callum had picked out himself after studying their Instagram with the seriousness of a man reviewing architectural blueprints. It was a dinosaur cake. It was beautiful. I invited my parents. I invited my aunt and her kids. I sent the invitation 8 weeks in advance. My mother confirmed 3 weeks out. She called me on a Tuesday evening and said yes, they'd be there, wouldn't miss it. They'd bring a gift. On the morning of the party, she sent a text. So sorry, sweetheart. Your father and I have tickets to the NAC tonight. We completely forgot. I know Callum will understand. We'll make it up to him. The NAC? The National Arts Center, which is a 20-minute drive from the community center. Tickets that apparently took priority over their 5-year-old grandson's birthday party, which she had confirmed 3 weeks earlier. I read the text once. I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. Callum was in his room getting dressed. I could hear him narrating something to his stuffed animals, some elaborate story involving a volcano and a missing egg and a hero whose name kept changing. He did this every morning. It was one of my favorite sounds in the world. I went and stood in the doorway of his room. He looked up at me with that particular brightness that 5-year-olds have, that complete and total belief that today is going to be wonderful. Is everyone coming? He asked. We're going to have the best time, I said, which was not a lie. That was important to me. 17 kids came to that party. My aunt came. My coworker came with her daughter, who is Callum's best friend. We played games and ate pizza, and the dinosaur cake was objectively a masterpiece. Callum ran around with the crown on his head for 2 hours straight. My parents did not come. At about 4 o'clock, when most of the guests had filtered out and I was packing up leftover cake and deflating balloons, Callum found me in the corner of the room. Did Grandma and Grandpa forget? He asked. Not angry, not crying, just asking in that honest, open way that kids ask things because they haven't yet learned to preemptively protect themselves from the answer. I crouched down to his level. They had something come up, I said. He thought about this. Did they forget it was my birthday? No, I said. They know it's your birthday. He nodded slowly. He looked like he was doing math he didn't quite have the tools for yet. Then he picked up a balloon and wandered off, and I stood back up and finished packing, and that was the last time I cried about my parents. What replaced the grief was something much quieter and much more useful. It felt like a door closing, not dramatically, just firmly. Click. 3 weeks after the party, my mother called. My sister and ex-husband, it turned out, had been making some investments. A friend of his had a new development venture outside of Barhaven, mixed-use residential, very promising, just needed some seed capital to get the permits moving. My ex-husband had put in a significant amount of his own money. My mother and father had put in $30,000, their retirement savings, or a portion of it, the portion they apparently had never mentioned to me. My sister had convinced them it was a sure thing. They needed more. They needed it quickly. The permits were taking longer than expected, and the developer was anxious, and could I, given my position and my knowledge of these things, perhaps contribute? And perhaps also indicate whether I had thoughts about whether this was a sound investment? I asked a few questions. I asked the name of the developer. I asked the name of the company. I knew that company. I knew it because 2 months earlier, a client of my firm had flagged a related entity in a compliance review. I couldn't share anything confidential, obviously, but what I could do, and did do, was pull the public filings, the corporate registry records, and 3 years of news archive in about 45 minutes. The project was not a development venture. It was a man with a numbered company and a history of taking deposits and disappearing before permits were ever granted. He'd done a version of this in Mississauga and in Kingston. He was currently the subject of an Ontario Securities Commission complaint that had not yet been publicized but was not difficult to find if you knew where to look. I called my mother back. "I've looked into it," I said. "I would not put money into this. I would strongly encourage you to speak to a lawyer about recovering what you've already contributed as quickly as possible." There was a pause. "Your sister says you're just being negative because of the situation with her and your ex-husband." I breathed in. I breathed out. "Mom," I said, "I'm telling you this as someone who does this professionally. Get a lawyer." She thanked me without warmth and got off the phone. They did not get a lawyer. My ex-husband doubled down. My sister told my mother that I was jealous and bitter and had always tried to undermine her happiness. My father said nothing. 6 months later, the developer took the money and the project folded. My parents lost $22,000 of the $30,000 they'd put in. My ex-husband lost considerably more. I want to be clear about something. I did not enjoy this. I want you to understand that there is a difference between watching something happen that you tried to prevent and watching it happen because you wanted it to. I had told them. I had been explicit and direct and professional, and I had been dismissed. The outcome was not my doing. I carried that distinction carefully because it mattered to me. What happened next, though? That was a little more deliberate. My ex-husband, facing significant financial losses and a custody arrangement that he had never taken seriously before, suddenly became very interested in Callum. Specifically, he became interested in the question of whether he was paying the appropriate amount of child support and whether the arrangement reflected his current income and whether a new assessment might be in order. What he did not know, because I had not told him or anyone else, was that my income had changed substantially over the previous year. The equity stake had vested. The acquisition had gone through a secondary transaction. I had also quietly purchased a 2-bedroom condo in Westboro with a view of the river, which I had moved into 4 months earlier. He found out about the condo through my sister, who found out through my aunt, who mentioned it in passing at Christmas without realizing it was information anyone was tracking. He filed for a variation of the custody arrangement within 3 weeks. His position, as conveyed to me through his lawyer, was that my improved financial circumstances were relevant to the support calculation and that he was seeking expanded parenting time and that several concerns had been raised about my parenting that he felt warranted a review by the court. The concerns, as listed in the materials his lawyer sent over, included that I was emotionally withholding, that I had isolated Callum from his extended family, and that my work schedule made me an inconsistent presence in his life. I read this document sitting at my kitchen table on a Wednesday evening with a cup of tea going cold beside me. Callum was asleep. Outside, the Redo River was dark and frozen and absolutely still. I called my lawyer in the morning. This is the part of the story where I should probably tell you who my lawyer is, and then you'll understand what happened in that courtroom a little better. Her name is Margot. She's 53 years old, and she has been practicing family law in Ottawa for 25 years, and she is, without question, the most frightening person I have ever met in a professional setting, which is why I hired her the moment I knew this was becoming a court matter. She is small and precise, and she has a way of looking at opposing counsel that makes them appear to be reconsidering their life choices in real time. When I brought her the materials, she read them quietly, then looked up at me. "They've made some characterizations here," she said, "that are going to be interesting to address." "Yes," I said. "Your ex-husband is claiming you've isolated your son from family, the extended family in question, those would be your parents, who missed his birthday party?" "Correct." "I'll need documentation, texts, call logs, the invitation, their confirmation, the text canceling." "I have all of it," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "How long have you been keeping records?" "Since I asked him to leave," I said. She smiled for the first time since I'd walked in. "Good." The family support recalculation was the easy part. Yes, my income had increased. The calculation was adjusted accordingly. This was not the victory, it was just the math. The custody review was where it got complicated, and also where my mother stood up in the gallery and announced to the courtroom that I was unstable. I should note that she was not called as a witness. She was not there in any official capacity. She attended because my ex-husband's family had invited her, and she attended, I think, because some part of her genuinely believed she was helping him. Or maybe she believed herself. I'm not sure it matters. What happened was that my ex-husband's lawyer made an argument about my parenting that relied heavily on the characterization that I had limited Callum's contact with his grandparents. Margot let him finish. She let him finish very completely, the way you let someone dig a hole before you explain to them that they're standing in it. Then she presented the documentation. The invitation sent 8 weeks in advance, the confirmation 3 weeks out. The cancellation text sent the morning of, citing NAC tickets. And then, quietly, methodically, a log of every family event to which Callum had been invited in the preceding 3 years, cross-referenced with attendance. The pattern was precise and inarguable. In 37 months, my parents had attended 4 events involving their grandson. I had cancelled none. When my mother stood up, it was because Margot had just finished laying this out. My mother's voice was loud and startled, the way voices get when a person realizes a story they've been telling themselves is being examined by strangers. The judge asked her to sit down. She sat down. He looked at my ex-husband's lawyer with an expression I can only describe as administrative disappointment. "Counselor," he said, "do you honestly not know who your client is dealing with here?" My ex-husband's lawyer had no good answer to this. There wasn't one. The custody arrangement was maintained. My ex-husband was ordered to pay retroactive child support for an 18-month period during which he had been underreporting income, something Margot had found in the financial disclosures, because she is thorough and because she had asked me early on if there was anything irregular about his finances, and I had said, quietly, that he had always been better at spending money than accounting for it. He did not get expanded parenting time. He got a very specific reminder from the judge about the importance of consistent presence in a child's life, and the record would show that Callum's primary residence would remain unchanged. After the hearing, my mother tried to speak to me in the hallway. I want to be clear that I didn't make a scene. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say the things I had rehearsed in the shower on bad nights. I looked at her, and I thought about Callum asking, did they forget? And I thought about that text sent the morning of his party, like it was nothing. Like he was nothing. Like I was nothing. I tried to help you, I said. With the investment, you know I did. She started to speak. I'm not interested in a conversation right now, I said. I need to go pick up my son. I walked out of the courthouse into a gray March afternoon that smelled like mud and almost spring. I sat in my car for 3 minutes. Then I started the engine and drove to Callum's school. Here's the part I think about sometimes. When I'm lying awake in my condo and I can hear the river and Callum is asleep down the hall. A few weeks after the hearing, I transferred $1 to my mother's bank account. Just one. I wrote in the memo field, birthday party, March. She called me immediately. What is this? I had a little left over from the celebration fund. I said, I wanted to make sure you got something. She hung up. I put my phone on the counter and made coffee and watched the sun come up over Westboro, and I thought about how strange it is that the smallest things sometimes say everything that 3 years of silence couldn't. My ex-husband and my sister broke up 4 months later. I know this only because my aunt mentioned it. I didn't ask. I don't particularly care. What I care about is this. Last Saturday, Callum and I went to the Byward Market and we ate beaver tails in the cold, and he told me a very long story about a dinosaur who wanted to be an astronaut, and I listened to every single word, and when we got home, he said, unprompted, Mom, this was the best day. That's the part I hold on to, not the courtroom, not the dollar, not the look on my mother's lawyer's face, not any of it. Just that. The best day, the cold air, the powdered sugar, my kid's voice going a mile a minute about a dinosaur in a rocket ship. That's what I was protecting all along. It always was. I keep coming back to that moment in the community center. Callum standing there with a deflated balloon, asking me with complete sincerity whether his grandparents had simply forgotten. Not angry, not devastated, just trying to understand how the world worked. And I think that's the image that changed something in me permanently. Not the courtroom, not the dollar. That question from a 5-year-old who still believed the best about people. Here's what I've learned. Slowly, the way you learn things that actually stick, the choices we make compound. Every time my mother chose her comfort over her grandson's birthday, every time my ex-husband chose resentment over responsibility, every time my sister chose alliance over honesty, those weren't isolated decisions, they were a pattern. And patterns eventually become outcomes. My mother didn't lose her credibility in that courtroom because of one bad morning. She lost it because of 37 months of documented absence. Cause doesn't always follow effect immediately. Sometimes it takes years. But it follows. What kept me sane through all of it wasn't anger. Anger is loud and it burns through everything, including you. What kept me functional was something quieter, a commitment to being the kind of person whose record could withstand scrutiny. I documented everything not because I was plotting, but because I understood, professionally and personally, that the truth needs somewhere to live. I told my mother the truth about that investment not because I wanted credit for it, but because it was the right thing to do. That's the only part of this I'm genuinely proud of. Not the winning, the part where I did the right thing even when I already knew I'd be dismissed for it. There's also the matter of actually thinking clearly when everything around you is designed to make you react. My ex-husband's legal strategy depended on me being emotional and disorganized. A lot of strategies like his do. The thing that dismantled it wasn't cleverness exactly. It was just careful, patient attention to what was actually true versus what was being claimed. Margot could only work with what I gave her. What I gave her was 3 years of quiet, consistent documentation. Intelligence isn't always fast and loud. Sometimes it's just staying methodical when other people have stopped bothering. And the endurance part, I don't think people talk about that enough. There's no version of this story where I didn't spend years feeling invisible, dismissed, categorized as the difficult one. There were nights I questioned my own memory. That's what sustained pressure does. It makes you doubt yourself. The thing that got me through was keeping my focus very small and very specific, Callum. That's it. Not vindication, not being believed, not reconciliation, just making sure he was okay. When you narrow your purpose down to something real and concrete, it's harder for outside noise to knock you off course. Callum is 6 now. Last week, he told me unprompted that our apartment feels like the cozy kind of home. I don't know exactly what he meant by that, but I know it was the best thing anyone has said to me in years, and I know it didn't happen by accident. It happened because I held on.